As we just demonstrated, there are monsters that can't be tamed. Similarly, in Book 1 of Aristotle's Rhetoric, he says something that makes me kind of sad, but it's true. He says that there are people who can't be taught. And what he means is that there are people that are sometimes not open to persuasion. But what about people that are open to persuasion? What about people that are open to your arguments and your attempt to influence them, to try to get their thoughts to tally with yours? What I want to tell you today is one of my favorite stories, and it's a true one. And it's going to take a little bit longer to get through, but let's quickly review where we were last time. Last time I told you that any time, I'm sorry for this cheesy little medium here, but paper works. Last time we were together, we talked about the idea that in rhetoric, all communication situations, some kind of voice is communicating something to about an audience. A voice has an ethos. An audience has pathos. That's an emotional appeal. And there's a logical appeal that centers on the subject. Now, when I first taught this to young people, it was way back in 1990. I was just getting going as a teacher. And I put this up on a blackboard, and I had a bunch of 15-year-olds in front of me at my old job, in my old teaching life. And I was worried that they didn't get it. They were just kind of sitting there blinking. It kind of felt like I was doing a card trick in front of a dog. And I remember driving home thinking, I've got to make this real to them. It's too abstract. I have to make it concrete. So I cooked up a little writing assignment that was designed to make this real to them. I did something relatively simple. And half the English teachers in this country have done the exact same thing. Set this on the grass for a moment. I told them, hey, in school we write for teachers. That's how it works. A teacher tells you to write something and you give it to them and they grade it and respond to it, evaluate it. I tried to convince them that it might be neat to take rhetoric and write something and send it out into the world. I had them, to just say it straightforwardly, write letters to Fortune 500 companies. I said, do this. Bring in the address of a company who sold you a product. Maybe you like the product, maybe you don't. I told them, let's write the company, and if you like the product, let's praise them. Let's tell them how valuable and useful it is in your lives. If you have a product that you've purchased in the world, I told them, that you do not like, let's write that company a letter of complaint. I gave them a 4-part strategy, so to speak. Introduce yourself in paragraph 1. Tell them your history of buying products, enjoying or not enjoying products with the company. In paragraph 3, tell them what you liked about it and thank them. If you didn't, tell them what the problem was. And when you get to the end of the letter, thank them again, or ask them what they're going to do to compensate you for a product that you don't care for. So I took 60 sophomores in 3 different classes up to the computer lab at my old job. This is 91 actually, fall of 1990. And they had their envelopes ready to go. IBM XTs, you could see them in a museum of computers. 5 1/4 floppies, green screens. No internet, if you can imagine that. No internet yet, at least not internet that we could use that had color and stuff. So we get going at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'll never forget, there was a young man in that room named Scott Safer. And I'd like to send him a link to this video because I've been talking about him for many years. Scott Safer at 8 o'clock in the morning looked up from his green screen computer and he said, Johnson, do we have to tell the truth? Right then and there, I should have said, absolutely, Scott. Why would you do anything but tell the truth? You're an honest man. I didn't say that. But I also didn't tell him no. I didn't say no, you can lie. I said something ridiculously ambiguous, which is something you should never do with 15-year-old boys. I said, Scott, I'll pick this paper up again. I said, Scott, I think you should tell the truth to the extent that your ethos is comfortable with it. And what does that mean? What does that mean? How about nothing? I'm not entirely sure what happened yet. Next, rather. But in my mind, maybe the story's apocryphal. In my mind, I've imagined that the telephone game happened, right? The seats were in a rectangle, right? And Scott's over here, the door's here. And I've got this funny feeling that the next kid said, what did Johnson say? Scott might have said something like, well, I don't know, something about ethos, truth, comfort. About in the middle of the room, I had this funny feeling that one kid said, what did Johnson say? And that kid might have said something like, well, I heard something about Egos, waffles, syrup. pretty sure by the time it got all the way around the room, telephone game-wise, I have a pretty strong feeling that that last kid said to the second to the last kid, "What did Johnson say?" And I'm pretty sure that that second to the last kid said, "He said we can lie. Let's lie." And they did, all day long. Worse, after they wrote these 55 letters, I didn't read a one of them. I did not read one single letter. I put them in the envelopes, I made them lick them because they didn't want that taste in my mouth, and we just sent them out in the mail, right? A disaster ensued that I never could have imagined. They created new ethoses for themselves. I don't know what the plural of that is. They became new people. They began to lie. They became factory workers, doctors, lawyers. It wasn't good enough to be 15-year-old students. They created new identities. They took logos or logic and they just threw it out in the snow, okay? They didn't need it because what those 15-year-olds wanted to do was guilt those companies big time. And they took that button called guilt and they pushed it through the control panel, into the floor, into the basement, and they hammered on these companies. And they told one lie after another. Because of my inner sophist that I talked about in the last lesson, I wasn't that bothered by it when a little bit of the disaster began, and then it got real bad. So I gathered up all the letters, I put them in the mailbox of the school, on the school's dime. The school paid for it. About a week later, it all began. I remember a student came in with a Hershey's Kiss the size of his head. He said, "Johnson, look at this." I'm not exaggerating. Memory is not embellishing this. It was huge. I said, "Whoa, how did you get that?" The student told me that he wrote the Hershey's company. He reported that he got a stale Hershey bar, and they sent him a Hershey's Kiss that I think he's eating still, 20 plus years in the future. And I'm so dumb. I said, "You know what? That's awesome. That's awesome. If the Hershey's company fell for that rhetorically, it's their lookout. It's their problem." Next day, Scott Safer came in with a case of pop. A case. He became someone new too in the letters. He told them that he was a factory worker, that he had worked and labored 12 long hours, that he was parched, that his throat was so dry, and that before he went home to his hour commute, he took his last 50 cents, that's what pop cost back then, put it into a machine, and got a can of air. Nothing. Like that could even happen. Well, we all had a can of Coke and had a good old time. We had Coke that could not be beat. Then it started getting worse. A student from Mexico wrote the Adidas, reported that he got these kangaroo skin soccer shoes, ran out onto the field, and they tore. He had no sales slip, but he included his shoe size, and they sent him a brand new pair. Umbro really forked it over that year. Several students wrote that they went out onto a field with their brand new soccer ball, kicked it, and the ball popped. They all got new soccer balls. A student named Pat Ingebrigtsen, who I remember so fondly and hope that he sees this, he didn't write one guitar string company. He wrote 10, just changing the address each time. He wrote at least 10, maybe a dozen guitar string companies and told them that he got these 10 gauge strings. I'm a guitar player, so I understand this. Put the strings on his guitar, and 2 days later, they were mysteriously tarnished. The nightmare really began to unfold for me when day after day after day, Pat Ingebrigtsen showed up with a new pair of guitar strings. Johnson, Fender, Diodario, GHS Boomer, and so forth. Now, I could go on and on. I could go on and on and on. But the deal is this. I keep putting this in the grass, which is a mistake. The thing is, these students were trained perfectly as rhetoricians. I didn't even know if America would respond. But rhetoric is about acting on the world. You act on the world, and the world is acting on you. You're acting on the world, and you're interpreting everything that the world is sending at you rhetorically. If you poke at America, America's going to poke back. And it seriously did, with cash, coupons, and merchandise. Then the worst thing of all happened. How many of you, raise your hand, I can't even see it, but just imagine. Any of you Comp 1 online students at Central Lakes College like Little Debbie Snack Cakes? I thought so. I had a student back then, and I'm not making this up, I could not be making this up, whose name was Deb. Deb Keemer. She's on my Facebook. I can prove it to you. Currently, she teaches chemistry at the University of Maryland. She has a PhD. She married the boy behind her, a young man named Jay Bemler, who kept tapping her on the shoulder. He could never tear his gaze from her. He fell in love with her when he was 15. He's a doctor now. They're married. He's a doctor. She's a chemistry professor. They got 3 beautiful babies. Just saw them on Facebook. But before all that happened, before she became a PhD and married Jay Bemler, her high school sweetheart, she was a 15-year-old student in this class. And she told the mother of all Whoppers to the Little Debbie Snack Cake Company. It wasn't good enough for her to remain a sophomore, a young woman. She became her mother. She became Mrs. Keemer. She wrote the Little Debbie Snack Cake Company, which is actually owned by the McGee Baking Company. Wonderful people down in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Very soft accents down in Tennessee. And her subject, we can put this in the grass for good now, was a Little Debbie Snack Cake. This is what happened. She wrote that company as her mother and said, you know what, we love your snack cakes. She conjured a kind of pantry that was like the Library of Congress of snack cakes. All the products you could imagine. She reported that her daughter, Deb, came running in one day and said, Mom, I'm hungry. Can I have a snack cake? She reported in the letter to the McGee Baking Company that she was so busy as she opened up the snack cake that she really failed to notice the toxic mold that was growing on the snack cake. She gave it to her daughter. Her daughter keeled over on the kitchen floor and had to be taken to the St. Cloud Hospital with an emergency allergic reaction. And she said, by the way, we're thinking about suing your company. The McGee Snack Cake Company was upset to hear this. Without calling, without writing, I'm looking towards Minneapolis, even though it's 80 miles away. They sent a representative all the way from Minneapolis, up Highway 94. He drove all the way to the Keemer household. I imagine him with sunglasses and an attaché case. He knocked on the door, where the real Mrs. Keemer answered the door and said, can I help you? And he said, I am so sorry about the snack cake. Is there any way that I can come in, talk with you, and my company might be able to write a check and compensate you so we can keep this out of the courts? Now I got trouble everywhere. I got an upset mom, and you don't want upset moms when you're a high school teacher. I ended up in the principal's office, again, door closed, getting yelled at. I was asked never to do that again. I said, okay, but I'm going to tell the story for years. I had a salesman that wasted 3 hours of his life overreacting probably to something my kids overdid that I overtaught. But the worst thing of all is that I supervised at the age of 30 the turning of 55 sophomores into complete sophists. They were sophists who lied, cheated, and extorted products from America. And you can say, yeah, well, heck, it's public relations. Maybe companies do that whether they think the letter's true or not. But that's not the point. The point is they got all the wrong ideas about rhetoric. Their ideas were, Johnson's awesome, rhetoric's awesome because it's teaching us how to get free stuff from America, and they also overlearned the part about hammering on people's emotions. You've got to keep those rhetorical appeals in balance. The ethos, pathos, logos thing, they're like balls that you've got to juggle. You can't overuse one or the other. You've got to keep them tidily in balance. And I've been telling this story for years. Mrs. Keemer is upset that I'm still telling the story. I've been telling it for 24 years, 23 years. I'm going to tell it for another 23 years because it reminds all of my students that language and words, we have an awesome responsibility to use them properly. There's a difference between right rhetoric and wrong rhetoric, and there's also a gray rhetoric. But that's for lessons ahead. Sorry this one was so long. I just had to tell you that story. It's cracked up people before. I hope it amused you.